All right. Hopefully you're here with me. So, we've ended World War II. We've gone into Unit 8, which is the Cold War, building some of this background knowledge. It's a huge topic. If we were in the classroom, of course, we would have time to, spend on more information that I'm going to present to you today. But as I told you in earlier video, that I'm just trying to kind of hit some of the big topics, some of the highlights. So at least in this remote learning, maybe you can walk away with just, some of the big understanding. So just do not feel like that this is everything. I'm nutshelling a few things for you here. We're going to cover what happened to Japan. If you remember, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. We did a couple of teaching videos on that. It's what brought World War II it's what brought the United States into World War II. In order for Japan to surrender, we ended up dropping 2 atomic bombs, we being the United States. And so we're going to look at what happened to Japan because Japan was, an imminent threat during World War II. And so what happened? Part of World War II, we discovered the Holocaust. We read the book about it. Not only were the Jews displaced, but people who, were hiding the Jews, as in Corinna's family, some of them were also displaced. So we're going to look at what, was one way to try to give these people who were displaced a place to be, and that is going to be the establishment of the State of Israel. And we're going to see how the United Nations partition plan was involved with that. All right, so let's look at Japan first. So as you see in this image, you have post-war Japan. This is an image of General Douglas MacArthur. So I'm just going to go through the bullet points with you. The Japanese were defeated in World War II, and it did leave their nation pretty much, just destroyed. The atomic bombs created physical destruction in and of themselves. The social changes that are going to occur from this is going to be destructive for people. So General Douglas MacArthur, he accepts the Japanese surrender. He takes charge of the U.S. occupation of the nation. MacArthur oversees the demilitarization. Pay attention of these words that I'm emphasizing. So oversees the demilitarization of Japan. He oversees war crimes trials and the democratization, or, Japan stopping being an empire and starting to become more of a democracy. By 1947, Japan has a constitution. MacArthur had successfully enacted land reforms that ultimately helped or benefited the Japanese. Japanese society is changed drastically. If I don't know, where you got to in 6th grade. When I taught 6th grade, we rarely got to all of Japan. But part of Japan society was, they had believed that their rulers were from their gods. That was very common in a lot of early civilizations. And so their ruler had this divine right to rule. They were hand selected from their gods. So the emperor, part of this, and so not only does society honor their gods, but they honor their emperor as being chosen from their gods, or possibly a direct descendant, depending on what their beliefs were. So the people now have to hear this emperor who they have honored, revered for so many years, that he is not divine, a divine leader, and he is only going to be a figurehead, kind of like the poster boy, the poster picture for Japan. So that is a huge change for life in Japan. By 1951, the United States and 47 other nations have signed a peace treaty with Japan, officially ending their part in the war. The U.S. keeps military in Japan in order to protect Japan. You can imagine a lot of countries may be angry with Japan. Remember what they were doing in World War II. So diplomatic relationships changed drastically. The United States and Japan actually become allies. The U.S. and the Soviet Union begin to compete for power in post-war world. So an academic image here. a good summary, just a quick summary, though, of these items. What are the big ideas that you need to know? Japan is no longer an empire. The emperor has to admit that he's no longer in charge. Number two, with not being an empire, now Japan has a constitution by 1947, and the government is more of a democracy. Also, a huge change, political change. Political changes is going to cause economic changes, societal changes. So that's huge. They're no longer ruled by one or an emperor, and they were really more ruled by their military. If you remember some of the learning that we did at the beginning of Unit 7 with the rise of totalitarian leaders. So now their military is no longer in charge, and they are more of a democracy. Huge change. And then number three, the United States and Japan become allies. Here they were enemies in World War II, and now they become allies as Japan agrees to world peace. All right, so we're going to move on then to what happens to displaced people of World War II, especially displaced Jewish people of World War II. So a little background into where they're headed. Israel. So if you remember colonization, Britain has an area that's controlled in the Middle East and called Palestine. This is mostly an Islamic area, so different religion. But in 1917, they have a document, the Britons do, where they actually promise the Jewish people a homeland in that area. And these homeland Jewish people are referred to as Zionists. So it's just a little background as to what's going on. Why did the people who were displaced from World War II feel that they could go there? It goes back to this 1917 document from Britain. So about 385,000 Jewish settlers flood into this country all of a sudden, over these years of the Holocaust, which we know started like as early as 1933, 32. And so you have a lot of the Jewish refugees of those areas coming into what should be their promised homeland. However, it is already settled by people of a whole different religion. So in the Arabic population who's there, this causes Arab rebellions over the next 3 years, 1936 to 39, you can see, which then creates a group of the Arab states themselves. So they band together to be allies and have a pact, and it's called the League of Arab States. Through this league, the Arabs revolt against the British who were controlling Palestine at that time. They murder a lot of innocent Jews, thousands. The Britons who are there, the British occupation, they're scared of the continued violence, so they stop allowing Jewish refugees into this land that this document 1917 says would be their homeland. So where do they have to go? The last bullet, Zionists, these homeland Jewish people, they feel betrayed, but they're like between a rock and a hard place. It's either Hitler and what he wants to do with the Jewish people, or it's Britain, who's supposed to be letting them in, but now will not. What do? Where do they go? So a little background there as to what's going on that led to the United Nations and their partition plan, which actually creates this state of Israel. So you have these Israelis, these Jewish refugees coming into this area. Palestinians are already there. You've got lots of revolts, lots of tension just already. So in May of 1948, the United Nations, which grew out of the League of Nations, I can't remember if I've already said this during this time period, were we in the classroom? We would have been able to see that. We learned about the League of Nations after World War I and how the United States didn't even become part of it. So the United Nations has taken the place of the League of Nations, and don't have time to go into that right now, but that's what the UN stands for. So in May of 1948, the United Nations partitioned Palestine, and they create the Jewish state of Israel. So you can see in the map over here that this area would have originally been all yellow, Arab state, pretty much, or a lot of it yellow. And so now through this partition or breaking apart into sections, They're given the areas that are orange to Jewish people, maybe Jewish people who already live there, not many, and then all the ones that are coming in due to Hitler and his aggression towards the Jewish people. And then the yellow is the Palestinians, and the Arab state. Okay. So Jerusalem is mandated by the UN. That means, it's ordered, like this is going to happen. And that means that Israel has every country that's involved in the United Nations as an ally, to have their back if this is going to cause a problem. Of course, the homeland Jewish people agree with the partition. They want this place. It was promised to them in 1917. They need it. This is a time in history. They need a place to be and to live and to call their own and not fear persecution. The Arabs don't agree with it. Not shocking. They're not ready to give up land and give up, their way of life and share their way of life or tolerate another way of life, right there next door to them. They haven't had to be doing that, and they don't really want to now. In fact, a little bit more history in this whole area. This whole area has been full of conflicts, as old as the Bible, just about, because all three of the big world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all trace back their beginnings to this area. They all call this area of the world their holy land or their homeland. That's where they believe that their religions began. And so, whose land is it if you trace it back to biblical times? But we're not going to go back that far. We're just going back to the 1917 document as whose land is it. So we've already got whose land is it? They're going to start arguing over that. As you see here, a number of battles, wars came out of this partition, this breaking apart. So we've got the Arab-Israeli War. So that's this yellow versus the orange. You have the Suez Crisis, where one of them is trying to control the Suez Canal. You have the Six-Day War. And even if Israel was the one being attacked and not doing the attacking, they won because, remember, they have all the countries of the United Nations as their allies, because this whole partition is ordered by the United Nations. So they've got a lot of countries, who have their back. So the last bullet, when Israel refused to negotiate for the return of land gained in these wars. So Israel wins a lot of the wars, they gain more land. Things, trouble starts to die down. They won't give up their new land. Egypt, here. Syria, here. Stage a surprise attack, and that becomes, in 1973, that becomes known as the Yom Kippur War. So a big result, as you can see, of the displaced Jews from Germany coming back home to their homeland are conflicts, battles, wars. Summary of creating the State of Israel. 1, historically, Israel was the homeland for Jewish people. So creating the State of Israel offered a place of residence for many of these displaced Jewish people of World War II. Secondly, the partition plan intended to create a recognized land for the people of Palestine and a recognized land for the people of Israel. That was the intention, was to have two areas. Kind of split up, but, areas that were recognized for two separate cultural groups. So what has happened to Palestine over the years, 1946 to 2000? You see it here. So green is Palestine land. White is Jewish land. And you can see over these 60 years what has happened. So, you come up with your own thoughts about this, right or wrong, right? But, excuse me, as you see, the partitioning didn't exactly work out as intended, because Palestine has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and Israel has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Israel would argue that that is their homeland, rightfully theirs, and so they should be taking it over. Palestine would argue that it's their homeland and they should not be losing out over all of these years. There's so much history there that I cannot cover it in just this time period. If you're interested in it, you can do a lot of research. It is out there, but I did want to show you this image to show you that why now, even just 20 years later, this ends with 2000, there is still struggle and issues in that area. And that's a result from what did the United Nations, what was the plan that they came up with for these displaced Jewish people? I mean, where were they supposed to go? You've got hundreds of thousands of people being forced to leave what was their homes and having to go somewhere. So this was one plan, but it has not worked out well for a group of people known as the Palestinians. So, summary of the effectiveness of the partition plan. You can argue both sides. It was effective for the Israelis. Kind of looks like it because they've gained so much land. It was ineffective because it didn't just, it didn't create two recognized places. You can do more research. You would have to defend your answer if that's what I asked you to do. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm summarizing what we could maybe use to say, was it effective or not? First, disputes start right away. Who owns the land, Palestine or Israel? So tension starts in the very beginning. Secondly, several battles because of this tension over the control of Israel or Palestine occur in response to the partition plan. Not only are the tensions right there locally, but tensions rise across the world, becomes a global issue between countries who are supporting this new state of Israel and countries who are opposing. So it becomes a global issue. And then 4, as you saw in the image before, the partitioning creates a Palestinian refugee issue. As the green got smaller and smaller and smaller, where can the Palestinians go? So it creates the reverse problem. First, you have a problem of what are you going to do with all these Israeli refugees, and your solution for them has now created a problem for where do Palestinian people go? And it is an ongoing issue. So your turn. All right. I want you to take this work and I want you to connect it to Unit 8 vocabulary terms. The slide deck is on my PowerSchool learning page, so you can get to it easily there. I want you to find 3 Unit 8 vocabulary terms that I have used or you have seen in this teaching presentation. And this is what I want you to do with them. I want you to write down how each vocabulary word is used. So write the word down and then write out the sentence that either I said or that you read in this presentation. Underline the vocabulary word in the sentence and then draw a picture of that sentence in action. So once you have done that with your 3 vocabulary words, so you should have 3 sentences, 3 quick illustrations, or make them take as long with them as you want to, make them detailed. Send me your work any way you desire. Maybe you take a picture of it, screenshot it, and send it to me. Since it's going to be a drawing, that would probably be the best way. You could video record, send it to me. I still love to hear your voices and see your faces. All right. Hope this has been somewhat, educational, beneficial. Like I said, there's a huge topic, and this is kind of just the skeleton view while we are remote learning.